Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's so nice to see all of you. By all means, please in the chat, tell us where you're tuning in from. I'm super excited to have a great friend who's on the same mission I'm on, Sejal Thakkar. She's with TrainXtra, and we are both focused on incivility and turning that into civility. And yeah, just super excited to talk with you today. So just to introduce you, you're a former employment law attorney. You've been a two-time TEDx speaker, something I'm attempting to accomplish myself, and you're the founder and chief civility officer at TrainXtra. So thank you, Sejal, for joining me.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. Me too. So, incivility has skyrocketed, I'm assuming, because I know that when we're stressed out and there's a whole lot of change, basically all of the things we've all been going through, that it can kind of create problems for us. So, let me know, what has it gone up, and what do we do about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I sort of gave myself my title of Chief Civility Officer when I started my company, which was in 2017, right? And so we knew we had a lot of problems back then, but it has definitely gone up since then. And, things like the global pandemic, Catherine, I mean, this has been a worldwide crisis that impacts everybody, right? And everybody is impacted by it uniquely. So this creates a real big challenge for companies into how do we deal with this? So, for example, like remote working, right? Technology. I mean, we saw a huge shift towards remote work. And so companies just weren't prepared to deal with when you were spending hours behind a computer. I mean, cyberbullying has increased tenfold, and you know about that topic way more than I do. But, people feel more comfortable hiding behind a computer screen or a phone and saying things or voicing frustrations that they are going to regret later on, right? And so that has impacted and caused a huge increase in incivility and problems for companies, because while they're trying to like keep up with the laws that are changing and update their policies and procedures and COVID and all of this stuff, they forget that, wait, we still have to create a safe place to deal with these incivility issues, even if we're working remotely. The other reason why incivility is skyrocketed is because you've got globalization, right? So like now I'm doing training from home, and I'm training people in India and London, all over the globe. And so now you have the chances of coming into contact with more people of different cultures. And so while something can seem like it's okay here, but it might not be okay in a different culture. And so if we don't manage that incivility that's happening between the different cultures, that can turn into friction and cause more, conflict later on.
Yeah.
Let's see what else. So then the other issue is obviously we can't have this conversation without acknowledging that, the civil rights movement, the Black Lives Matter, that increased fear and uncertainty in so many ways for people. And so we saw the Black Lives Matter movement, which impacted me personally very significantly. But these small verbal insults, microaggressions, and things that brought all these topics to the forefront, if we don't address those incivilities when they start to happen, then that's going to create this larger culture of violence and unsafety. So many things have happened in just the last few years that are really, I think, forcing companies to look at how do we manage all this stuff in a different way than we've done before, which, by the way, hasn't worked. Right.
Right. We haven't made it very far in our quest for civility. And that's we could have a whole conversation about that too, which let's do that. My theory, and I'm curious about your thoughts, is that we've been so focused on big issues like anti-harassment. That's really far down the spectrum of behavior. And then we do things like communication skills, or this makes me cringe, but sensitivity training. And there's kind of no middle ground, right there. What about all that behavior in between? And one thing I find is that managers have never been trained or told about, coaching someone who engages in microaggressions, or, it's like, because we're so focused on these big moments like harassment, that we forget that, hey, we probably should talk to people if they're gossiping or making inappropriate comments. And for me, that's a big a big issue that I think would make a big difference if we could start training on things like coaching bad behavior before it gets all the way up. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I agree with you. And that really is the foundation of why I started my company, is because as an employment law attorney, that's what I saw over and over again. I'm like, how is this person getting away with this behavior for so long? And what I determined was that we're not addressing the behavior when it starts to happen in the right way. And if we do that and we train our supervisors, especially leadership, right, and also frontline managers that are interacting with the people in your organization, to understand that if we don't address that behavior when it starts to happen, it's not going to go away. It's not something you just brush under the carpet and think, okay, I don't have to deal with this. No, that behavior, as we all know, was going to continue, and it's going to continue, and it's going to fester and fester until it turns into conflict. So absolutely agree with you. And also, let's not forget that people's tolerance levels for dealing with uncivil behavior in the workplace has gone down. I say this over and over again, significantly. People are just not willing to put up with it anymore. And so when you have behaviors like microaggressions that are happening or unprofessional behaviors, if people know how to disrupt that progression of behavior, right? And I call it the uncivil behavior spectrum in my workshops. But if we train people how to interrupt that or disrupt that spectrum, then and training is just one component of it, right? It has to be, that's why I call it sort of the civility action plan, and we can talk about that. But training is a huge, huge part of that. And it's very important to do it in the way that's going to work for people. We're all different, and how we learn is different. And so you can't just think you're going to find one solution that's going to work for everybody. And I mean, just look around, look at what companies are doing. What are they currently doing? Now we're finally offering micro learnings. We're finally offering virtual live. So we're headed down the right way. But also, I think we need to just kind of look at it from a really innovative approach of how are we going to impact and put our people first. And so you and I swear we could probably talk about this conversation for like 8 hours.
I know. I was just thinking, why aren't we both in the same company? Why do we have different companies? We'll talk about that later. We've got, speaking of global, we've got someone here from Egypt. So I'm going to attempt your name, but please tell me if I said it wrong. Fatia? And she says, how do you handle an uncivil team leader? So I know we both have answers. I'm going to let you answer first.
Yeah. And this goes right to that topic of civility action plan, because it starts at the top, right? Leadership are the role models. And so if you have a manager or a supervisor or a leader in the organization displaying certain types of behaviors, so again, rude or unprofessional behaviors. I use this example, right? So you have a manager, and this is a really important part of this answer, is that a lot of times uncivil behavior is often by people who have good intentions. So I think people need to understand that point, because you can have a manager, for example, who has very good intentions, who's trying to motivate their team and occasionally yells at that person, right? So good intentions, but is yelling. And so we might see that, and we see that, and we're, everyone sees it. Everyone talks about it and with amongst itself, but what do you do in that situation? And so when you are dealing with managers, this is very important that they understand exactly what we're talking about. So in this case, the conversation is about civility. What is civility? So you have to define it and clearly communicate that to the management so everybody understands exactly what they are being asked to do. And then accountability, right, is critical at all levels, at all positions, including management. This needs to be something that needs to be measured. And I often tell some of my clients, like, look, consider evaluating your managers or your executives on their commitment to civility and how they treat people. Like when you make that a performance measure, you're basically letting everybody know that this is a fundamental core value, which it should be for every organization. And then if they're not measuring up, then you have to have appropriate responses to those concerns, right? Because if employees don't believe that when they make a complaint or a concern, something's going to be done about it, guess what? They're not going to talk about it. They're not going to bring it up, which creates a huge problem. Right. So again, great question. Thank you for that. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it too, Catherine.
I'm just going to say everything you said. Yeah. I mean, we did some work, just as an example, with an IT department where lots of problems there. Actually, it was in the height of the Me Too moment. One of the things we did was, in addition, this was the university IT department. So in addition to the university's own matrix that they were using for performance management, we added to the IT department's version, so that just as you said, directors, we started with directors and rolled it out over time, but initially directors were now held accountable and measured on their ability to be inclusive. And we had a matrix for that, that if you're good at it, this is what it looks like. And if you're not good at it, this is what it looks like. And we had matrix on what else was in there, the ability to coach poor behavior. And so, yeah, it was really holding directors accountable to their ability to lead an inclusive team. And then over time, like I said, we rolled that out. And also core values. You can do that with company core values. If you say, here's the core values and here's what it looks like if you live those core values, and here's what it looks like if you're not. And then you can measure people on that. Also, I have a side, one thing that I think I do that I think you probably don't do is specifically coaching leaders who engage in toxic behaviors. And to your point, if somebody's complaining that the vice president of marketing is an ass and nobody's doing anything about it because it's not technically legal, then what's the message? Well, obviously you don't care about behavior. So when I witness something really illegal, I'm probably just not going to say anything, and I'll just leave and go somewhere else, and I'll talk about it on Glassdoor. So those people can be coached. And also, to your point, they're not doing it because they're horrible people. They do it because they care about the success of the organization, and they're focused on results, but they're too focused on results. But they're not focused on results for their own, excitement and because they like to hold people accountable by yelling at them. They've just lost their way. And that's what I found in coaching individuals like that. So thank you for your question. We also have someone here from Greece. So speaking of global, I love it. So you had mentioned Civility Action Plan. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's like literally repeating back what you just said, right? So again, I'm encouraging organizations that, define civility first. What does that mean for your organization, and make it a priority? Just like with diversity, just like with inclusion, right? And then clear definition of what constitutes civility and why it's important as part of your core business strategy. And so and when I talk about business strategy, I'm talking about internal as well as external, right? So sometimes you see organizations caring too much about how they look on the outside, but not worried about how it is on the inside. Mm-hmm. And so we want to cover all our bases, right? And understand that every contact we have with somebody, and any individual, whether they're a contractor or an intern or a manager or a supervisor, it doesn't matter who they are. We're making this commitment of civility. And so define it. So one of the things that I talk about in my workshops, Catherine, is I like the definition of Dr. Cynthia Clark, right? You know who she is, and she's done a lot of research on civility. And I love her definition because she really breaks it out into different elements. And as an attorney, I like that because I want to simplify this as much as possible for people, for them to understand what civility is. And so I just want to share this definition, right? It's very important and really highlights why we need to make this a priority for everybody. And so this is not my definition. I've just adopted the definition by Dr. Cynthia Clark. So I want to give credit where it's due, but I'm not going to reinvent the wheel since it's already out there. But I love her definition. She says it's an authentic respect for others that requires time and presence, a willingness to engage in genuine discourse with an intention to seek common ground. So there's a lot in there, right? Yeah. But you want to make it very clear that no matter whether we agree with each other or not, whether we like each other or not, whether I admire you or not, I'm going to respect you because you're a human being and you deserve the dignity and respect that I do. And then it's about making time to be present, right? Mm-hmm. So we're everybody, you hear this every other day, hustle culture, cancel, we are running, we're racing from one thing to the next. And oftentimes, even if we see something bad going on, no matter what it is, we just don't do something because we don't have the time to take care of that. We've got enough. Most of our plates are overflowing. Like, it's hard. So, but we have to commit everybody, when I say we, means everybody, top to bottom, bottom to top, sideways, everywhere, has to commit to make time for each other, to be present with each other, to talk to each other when there's differences, there's misunderstandings, there's malice, there's abusive, whatever the behavior is, but to talk to each other with really an intention to seek common ground. And common ground when we're at work is what the mission of the organization is, what the vision of the organization, and as well as your own personal core values, right? But we have to have these conversations, and then you just align your civility goals with your, you got to put the money behind it. Let's be real. It's going to be expensive. It's not cheap, but neither is a lawsuit. Trust me.
Right.
But also it's going to protect it's going to create psychological safety. And that's what we want, because that's where people feel like they belong. That's where they're motivated. That's what, guess what, for all the senior managers, that's where the bottom line is going to come to I know you look at the bottom line. So you benefit, everybody benefits. And believe me, and I'll say this over and over again, you'd rather have employees come to you first, like you said, or put it out there on Glassdoor, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, everywhere. So you can't keep things indoors anymore. It's going to go outside very quickly. I mean, just spend 10 minutes on LinkedIn, right? Like that's where I spend a lot of my time, but like 10 minutes and people are talking about it, which is good. Yeah. We want more people to talk about it, and we want them to have these conversations openly so that we can teach people what to do when these things happen. Instead of hiding it or paying an attorney $600 an hour, let's just talk about it and let's figure this out together, right? So
yeah. We talking about LinkedIn, someone says, Brandy, I have left several companies due to rude behavior. So yeah, there we go. People talking about it. Yeah. Okay. We have a question from Marlo. How do you measure management and C-suite on their DEI? Do you follow up with them to ensure they're not going through the motions by checking off boxes because their oversight tells them to do it?
Sorry, I'm putting it on mute because my mom's phone is ringing in over there. So, I think feedback is critical, right? So figuring out how to get feedback in the moment, I'm a big fan of, you got to have face-to-face contact with people. Like I know a lot of organizations, and we need to have different touch points and different automated ways of doing it. But I still think that people-to-people feedback that you get one-on-one, having a conversation with somebody in the company, talking to them regularly, building that rapport. Yes, it takes more time. Yes, takes more effort. But I think that's what works, because you need to have somebody that's kind of the glue, and so senior managers, it's a perfect way of, encouraging them. We want this to be something of empowerment, right? That's what accountability is going to work, when people are empowered. And so with senior managers, I think, it's just really important to properly empower them. And it's not just saying we empower you and that's enough. It's to give them the resources, the support, the time, the money to learn about themselves. And this is the important part, is that, again, if you make that as a core value, everybody's committing to that. So that means you yourself have to do the work. Just like everybody else. So it's like everybody's on the same page, and it gets rid of this like, oh, well, I've heard this in my trainings, and I know you have too. It's like, well, senior management's getting away with it. So why am I motivated to be nice to the person sitting next to me? Right? I'm like, yeah, you're right. Why are you? We need to talk about that, and let's figure out how to solve that, versus paying that person more money and promoting them even more while they continue to cause more harm throughout the whole organization, right? So sorry, long answer, but obviously I'm passionate about this topic.
It comes through. Yeah, I feel the same way. I get that too, where it's like, well, I'll integrate all of these things you taught me once leadership does X, Y, and Z. And it's like, no, that's not, everybody's responsible for the culture. And culture lives in those little nuanced interactions we have throughout the day. It doesn't live in the C-suite. Yes, they influence it, but it lives in your team. And, I'm thinking, if you're in a large organization, for example, you don't even know the CEO. You never talk to the CEO. So don't let that leadership or lack thereof, hold you to, well, I can't do anything. Now, if you're in a smaller organization, like there's 7 of us at Civility Partners, and I'm not civil, that's another conversation. And I think in those scenarios, you have to say, this person doesn't meet with my core values, and so I don't want to be here. There's plenty of organizations out there who do meet with your core values. And that's the thing that employers are starting to learn, is that People is, COVID really opened their eyes. Like, people can go and find an employer where they want to be, and we're not stuck in a place just because we need to pay the bills. So
Right.
employers have to think about that. And Marlo, to your question, you can measure management in the C-suite in the same ways you measure everyone else, by having core competencies related to things like inclusive behavior, communication skills, proactively building an inclusive team. And again, if it's, the boss, the CEO who's not doing those things and doesn't care about those measurements, then that's when you get to decide, do I even really want to be here? So we've got some other great comments. An imperative issue raised here: more talk, better solutions may arise. That is why we do what we do.
Absolutely.
I have another question for you, similar to the idea of incivility and DEI. What about unconscious bias? Does that, how does that play into all of this in your mind?
Yeah. I mean, I really got passionate about unconscious bias when I was, first of all, my own personal experiences, right? And what I've gone through, and sort of some of the biases that I've had to deal with, both conscious and unconscious. So I've always had a personal passion behind it. But what really became obvious is when I was as an attorney, I saw the same thing happening that you mentioned earlier, whereas like these behaviors were I was thinking I was going to run into these like, really, really awful, malicious, like slimy people or something like that. And most of the time they were good people. And as I started digging into that, I'm like, wait a second, nobody's ever talked to this person about this, not just because it was when it first started to happen, but beyond that, right? So the idea of, well, these are people that are not intending to harm somebody, but they're making stereotypical comments, and why are they making them? And really just trying to get behind, how do we do this differently? And so I also started coaching managers and supervisors in an attempt to figure that out, and started really in my work, started seeing that a lot of these behaviors were microaggressions, right? And so microaggressions, when I started looking at that and learning more about it, understanding that it comes from unconscious bias, right? And so I started learning more about that. And so, unconscious bias is something that impacts all of us. And it's literally, if you think about like conscious bias and unconscious bias, it's in a lot of ways, it's like a matter of speed. Unconscious associations take place in like the blink of an eye, right? They're these quick, inaccurate judgments our brain makes based on limited facts, usually, and what we've gone through in our own lives. And so these, obviously, you want to know if you have these, because if you don't know, because awareness is the first step. So you have to understand what your own unconscious biases are. But if you don't do that work, then you're going to be saying and doing things unintentionally, not knowing that's causing harm to people in your life, including your loved ones. Yeah. And so that's really how I got to unconscious bias, and how I've really started incorporating that into my work of civility. Because when I talk about sort of these behaviors that start to happen, I'm going a step beyond that and saying, let's also talk about microaggressions, because they are another animal. And what we've been dealing with conscious bias and how to deal with that in our anti-harassment trainings and our compliance trainings, I've been doing that for years. Right. I wanted to really go deeper than that and try to address the issue when it starts off with people of microaggressions, because we're in this country, right? And so we need to figure out a way to address the problems that are happening in this country. And so we need to prepare for it. So I'm not just looking at organizations, that's where I'm starting, but I'm really saying, as human beings, we need to understand unconscious bias so that we're not going to continue to. This is going to keep happening. This is a cycle, right? The civil rights movement that we just went through is nothing new. We've seen this go on forever. And so how do we go even deeper in addressing that? So that's kind of how I got into unconscious bias and why it's important to the work that I'm doing.
Yeah. How many civil rights movements do we need to have before we make some change? I'm with you. I mean, it sounds like you have one too, where we talk about the spectrum of negative behavior, and that it starts off with incivility, microaggressions, unprofessionalism, which of course is related to microaggressions and DEI, because that's a white construct. And then the idea is that if you don't address those things, then they escalate into bullying. And as someone who's read 40 years of academic research on workplace bullying, I could tell you, people don't just become a bully it starts with those other things, and then nobody ever calls them out. And so over time, this kind of negativity becomes more and more normal for them and everybody else around them. And then they continue to push the envelope and continue to not be corrected. So, and I was thinking as you were talking how incivility and unconscious bias interplay, because incivility is essentially an action that demonstrates that you don't value someone. And you had given a great definition of civility earlier that, was the opposite of that, you're demonstrating you value someone by taking the time to try to understand them. And so incivility is, I'm interrupting you. And so the messaging there is, I don't value you, or I cut you off in traffic. The message there is, I don't care about you. Versus a microaggression, those are generally about building rapport. It's just misplaced action. So just thinking of one example, I was talking to someone recently who's Hispanic, and he said that when he was doing real estate in a very white neighborhood, often people, they'd meet him and, oh, nice to meet you. I have a friend who's Mexican. And then he said he would always joke and go, well, I have a dad who's Mexican. How interesting, we have something in common. But that's what they were doing. They were trying to build rapport with him. You're different than me, and I can see that. And gosh, I'm in a super white neighborhood. I've never interacted with a Hispanic person before. And so, I don't know, I was just kind of thinking about that incivility and microaggressions actually come from different places. But even with incivility, I don't think people purposefully are like, I'm interrupting you because I really don't value you and I don't like you. It is more, I'm excited. And so I want to tell you what I have to say, I think. I don't know.
No, I love that. I love this topic. I think it's so important that we're talking about this, Catherine. And I agree with you. I think it could come in a lot of different shapes, forms, and sizes, right? And so I really focus on really how do we create situations where we can, what I call is call in that person, right? So whichever way you want to look at it, however you want to define it, sometimes these labels even confuse us even more, right? But how do we create situations or workplaces or cultures where people can call in each other? And that's just because if we don't, it's going to continue to turn into that toxic work environment. And so if we train people, but if we create those psychologically safe cultures, then it's going to be a lot easier for us to say to somebody like who might be joking, to say, hey, you might be joking, but because of my life, because of what I've experienced, that's not okay with me. And we have to be able to say that to each other without like getting all defensive and, and then thinking they're out to get you, or, they're going to retaliate against you. It's like, we have to be able to say that to each other. And our normal defense is we're going to get defensive. That's our natural, we're going to go there. But we have to know how to deal with that. And how do we react? And so like when I in my workshops, I walk people through a step-by-step process of saying, it's natural for you to feel upset. Nobody wants to be called in or told that they might be doing something, to harm somebody else, because nobody wants to think they're a bad person. And you're not a bad person in a lot of these situations. You're a good person. And we're just trying to help you by letting you know that, hey, it's not about like you ask somebody, where are you from, that person's trying to, get all upset. There's a reason behind why that person is feeling those feelings when you ask them, like, where are you really, really, really from? There's a reason why they're feeling that way. And it may have nothing to do with you meaning to harm them or not. But we have to be able to say it, but people aren't saying it. And so we have to teach them how to do these call-ins, right?
Right. I love that. And we have a great comment from Brandy. That's a good closeout. In this capitalistic society, it seems people are valued by income or potential income rather than the human being we are here to be. And I think Sejal and I can both attest to the fact that that's why we're here. We have clients who are caring more and more about the humans that work for them. And I think COVID also, I know COVID also brought more attention to the fact that everyone is a human, and we need to focus not only on performance, but behavior and caring and kindness. So it was so fun to talk to you. And I feel like eventually we'll be working together. We're going to have a project together or join forces in some way. So
Let's put that intention out there, Catherine. It's going to happen for sure.
Yeah. So tell everyone what your website is. And of course, I'll just say you can reach out to either of us on LinkedIn. You obviously can see us on LinkedIn. We're on this page. But what's your website?
It's TrainXtra.com, and that's TrainXtra.com.
Love it. All right. Well, thanks, Sejal. I know I'll see you soon in our realm of where we hang out. And thanks all for tuning in.
Bye.